Now you'll notice when we skip over to chapter 38, you would expect that here's Jeremiah who has consecrated and devoted his entire life to the Lord and to do this prophetic work that was extremely unpopular in his particular day. In fact, I have a hard time coming up with any prophet who has more rejection maybe than Jeremiah in his particular setting from more angles in the Old Testament story. To the point where, look at verse 6, they took Jeremiah and cast him into the dungeon of Malchiah, the son of Hemelech, that was in the court of the prison, and they let down Jeremiah with cords, and in the dungeon there was no water but mire. So Jeremiah sunk in the mire. That's what he gets for his reward for being this faithful prophet.
And not to be indelicate about it, but the mire there is not just, there's some mud in the bottom. This is used as a cesspit and a trash pit. So he's sinking down into refuse and human waste and all sorts of other things. And this is how they treat the prophet. But what we get is this really interesting and touching story. So here's Jeremiah. He's sunk down into this mire. I'll use the King James word there. And verse 7, now when Ebed-Melech the Ethiopian, one of the eunuchs which was in the king's house, heard that they had put Jeremiah in the dungeon, and the king sitting in the gate of Benjamin, Ebed-Melech went forth out of the king's house and spake unto the king. Now what's really interesting is we get this story in which Ebed-Melech the Ethiopian recognizes that this is not how you should treat the prophet of the Lord, and he goes to Zedekiah and says, I want to be able to bring him out and to move him somewhere else. And what it teaches me is it's really interesting. Ebed-Melech probably is not even his real name, because in Hebrew that means servant of the king. Mm-hmm. So we have this Ethiopian, a person of color, who is there in Jerusalem serving the king. We don't even know his real name, and yet he recognizes this is not how you treat prophetic authority, and this is not what should happen to Jeremiah. And he stands up and he actually goes and pleads the case to the king, who then lets him do it. So we have this situation in which Ebed-Melech the Ethiopian goes and he chucks down some rags and says, put them underneath your armpits. And then they lift Jeremiah up out of the miry clay and all the refuse and waste that's down there, and they move him to a better spot. And it's just a story of courageousness of some lowly servant that we don't even have his real actual birth name saying this isn't how we do things, and we can stand up in the face of our superiors and say this is right how we should act in a godly manner.
And there are so many characters like this Ebed-Melech throughout the scriptures that we don't really know their backstory. You don't know what happens to them in the future. They come onto the scene for a little teeny moment in time, and the Lord works through them in a variety of ways to help his work move forward. I have a long list of these people that I want to meet in the next life. He's on it.
Absolutely.
He's one of those people I want to just meet and thank for having the courage to approach the king and say, this isn't right. Let me pull him out. And the king let him do it.
And the king let him do it. And Ebed-Melech's reward, just very briefly, in Jeremiah chapter 39, starting in verse 16, go and speak to Ebed-Melech the Ethiopian, saying, thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel. So a direct statement from Jehovah. Behold, I will bring my words upon this city for evil and not for good, and they shall be accomplished in that day before thee. But I will deliver thee in that day, saith the Lord, and thou shalt not be given into the hand of the men of whom thou art afraid. For I will surely deliver thee, and thou shalt not fall by the sword. But thy life shall be for thee for a prey unto thee, because thou hast put thy trust in me, saith the Lord. Ebed-Melech's reward is that he is not going to die in the Babylonian siege and destruction of Jerusalem. He's actually going to be spared and allowed to live his full life as he should. So it's just it's a really great story in the midst of a bunch of tragedy. We talked about the fact that there's an 18-month siege of Jerusalem. Jerusalem's cut off. The Babylonians have surrounded it. They've already had a couple waves of exiles. They know it's going to be bad. The Babylonians have destroyed other cities, and so they're very well aware of what the Babylonians are capable of. And the situation is desperate in the last days of Jerusalem. This is the situation that they face before the Babylonians finally break through, take the city. Zedekiah is killed, as we know, and Jeremiah, for his part, is going to be left. Actually, Nebuchadnezzar himself spares Jeremiah and allows him to go free. And eventually, a group of Judahites are going to take Jeremiah and Baruch to Egypt to kind of escape how bad things are after the Babylonian conquest. They're going to move to Egypt. And the rest of Jeremiah chapters 39 through 42 are going to be prophecies that Jeremiah makes against the surrounding countries around Judah, even against Egypt, about how Babylon's going to come. And then there's a little bit of a historical repeat from 2 Kings in there. And so Jeremiah is going to survive the siege. He is going to eventually be taken to Egypt, and he's going to end his time there, still being a prophet of the Lord, carrying out the Lord's word, even in a new type of Egyptian sojourn.